In a world addicted to victimhood, every complaint has become a form of currency. We reward confession over competence, exposure over excellence. The more pain you share, the more likes you collect. The more trauma you reveal, the more people pause to validate you. But power? Real power doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't cry out. It moves in silence. Power belongs to those who refuse to think like victims, those who may have suffered but do not allow that suffering to define them. Modern culture has confused visibility with influence. We've mistaken public pain for personal power. The truth is, those who rise don't dwell in pain. They transform it. They take what hurt them and use it as leverage. They don't compete in the arena of grievances. They build kingdoms in silence. While others are performing their wounds, these people are preparing their moves. The world may listen to the loudest cries, but it follows the quietest strength. Leadership doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg for empathy. It commands through presence. If you still think like a victim, if your identity is wrapped in what happened to you, then you will always be led, never leading. Because leadership begins the moment you stop blaming and start building. Machiavelli didn't write for the weak-hearted. His words weren't meant to comfort. They were meant to clarify the brutal truths of power. In The Prince, he declared, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." It wasn't cruelty. It was calculus. Machiavelli understood something that modern culture has forgotten. Power is not given. It is taken. In Renaissance Italy, politics wasn't a popularity contest. It was survival. Intrigue, betrayal, war. These weren't exceptions. They were the rules. You either played or were played. There was no room for victimhood because there was no reward in it. Victims didn't rise. They were used. They were sacrificed. Leaders played chess while the weak were just pieces on the board. One of Machiavelli's most chilling observations cuts straight to the heart of this truth. Men should either be treated generously or destroyed because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot. It's a harsh statement, but it reveals something vital. When you position yourself as a victim, you reduce your own capacity to act. You enter a state of waiting, waiting for justice, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone else to fix your situation. But waiting is not strategy. It's surrender. In the modern age, we've glamorized suffering, made it a badge of honor. But Machiavelli would see this for what it is, weakness disguised as virtue. Strategic power begins not when you start telling your story, but when you stop letting that story control you. You don't need to narrate your wounds. You need to weaponize your silence. Victimhood is a shelter, and like all shelters, it offers comfort, but at a price. It protects you from the storm, but it also keeps you from building anything outside of it. The longer you stay inside, the more afraid you become to leave. That's the hidden cost of victim thinking. It feels safe. It feels justified, but it quietly robs you of initiative, of dignity, of power. Take the modern workplace. Two employees face the same unfair manager. One spends their energy complaining about favoritism, toxic culture, bad leadership. The other watches, learns, navigates. The first feels morally right. The second becomes strategically effective. Guess who gets promoted? The world doesn't reward noise. It rewards leverage. In relationships, victimhood shows up as the partner who constantly says, "You don't understand me. You never listen. You always hurt me." These statements might be true, but repetition becomes a form of self-handicapping. Meanwhile, the person who listens deeply, adjusts tactics, understands emotional patterns. They gain real influence, not by controlling, but by mastering the dynamic. Influence is quiet. Victimhood is loud. Then there's the battlefield of modern social media, the arena of the oppression Olympics. Here, people compete not to be the most resilient, but the most wounded. Pain becomes a brand. Victimhood becomes identity. Followers gather not around strength, but shared suffering. We no longer ask, "How did you rise?" We ask, "How badly were you broken?" This is the core problem. Our culture rewards the appearance of pain, not the transformation from it. But leadership doesn't emerge from public displays of damage. It emerges from quiet resilience, from scars that don't need to be shown to be real. Leaders aren't victims. They're survivors who stopped explaining, who stopped asking the world to see them, and instead chose to move it. They don't narrate their wounds like a story on repeat. They turn those wounds into maps and then lead others out. There are three types of victim thinking, each more seductive, more socially accepted, and more dangerous than the last. Most people don't even recognize when they're trapped inside them. Why? Because victimhood doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it wears the mask of virtue. Sometimes it's even mistaken for strategy. But underneath, it corrodes power, corrodes leadership, and leaves you dependent, not dominant. 1. Passive victimhood. They control me. This is the most obvious form. The belief that everything happening to you is someone else's fault. You've handed over the keys to your life, to the government, to the boss, to the system, to your parents. Your identity becomes your disadvantage. You believe you're shaped by forces you can't influence, and so you stop trying. This mindset is rooted in what psychologists call an external locus of control. It's the mental shortcut that says, I'm stuck because of them. You don't negotiate. You don't navigate. You wait. And while you wait, someone else takes the opportunities you ignore. Example, the employee who says, why even try? Promotions are rigged. So he doesn't innovate. He doesn't speak up. He doesn't risk. He chooses resentment over resourcefulness. But here's the paradox. The most obedient slave is the one who believes freedom isn't possible. That's the trap of passive victimhood. You surrender before the fight even starts. Not because you're weak, but because you've convinced yourself that strength is irrelevant. And once that belief takes hold, no one has to cage you. You'll stay in the cell willingly. 2. Moral victimhood. I'm the good one. This form is trickier. It's not about powerlessness. It's about moral superiority. It says, because I've suffered, I'm better than you. It uses pain as a weapon. It wears trauma like armor. And it turns victimhood into a currency of righteousness. This person doesn't seek resolution. They seek recognition. They don't want to solve the conflict. They want to win the narrative. Their pain justifies their behavior. If they lie, manipulate, withdraw, or sabotage, it's okay, because they've been hurt. And hurt makes them the hero. Example, in relationships, it's the partner who believes, because you hurt me, I now have the right to control you emotionally. Apologies are demanded, but never accepted. Boundaries are preached, but rarely practiced. The danger? It feels like power, but it's not. It's control without growth. Attention without evolution. Victims seek sympathy. Leaders seek leverage. A leader uses pain to rise. A moral victim uses pain to rule. And in doing so, they become the very thing they claim to resist. Manipulative, rigid, unaccountable. 3. Strategic victimhood. I'll appear weak so I win. Now we enter the deepest layer, the most deceptive of all. Strategic victimhood. Here, weakness isn't felt, it's performed. This is weaponized vulnerability. Playing small not because you believe you are, but because it lulls others into underestimating you. It's the act of lowering defenses, appearing harmless, feigning confusion, while silently calculating your next move. Example, a political leader who speaks in soft tones, avoids confrontation, never claims credit, but behind the scenes, orchestrates power moves that crush rivals. The boardroom executive who says, I'm just here to support, but ends up holding the reins. This isn't victimhood in the emotional sense, it's psychological misdirection. And Machiavelli would have admired it. The strongest players sometimes walk in like lambs, but leave like lions. It's cold. It's effective. But here's the twist. Even this version carries risk. Because if you pretend to be weak for too long, you may start to forget your strength. The mask becomes your face. And eventually, you might lose the ability to lead without deception. So what's the lesson? All three types of victim thinking, passive, moral, strategic, offer comfort. They offer safety. They offer attention. But none of them offer real power. Because power requires responsibility. It requires stepping out of the narrative of what's been done to you and stepping into the battlefield of what you will now do. True leaders don't think like victims. They think like architects, like surgeons, like generals. They don't say, look what happened to me. They say, watch what I build from it. Power doesn't start with your environment. It starts with your identity. The way you see yourself quietly programs the way you behave. If you carry the identity of a victim, you begin to act accordingly, hesitating, second-guessing, waiting for permission. This isn't just philosophy. It's psychology. Victim identity leads to learned helplessness. The belief that no matter what you do, nothing will change. So you stop trying. And the world, seeing your withdrawal, stops offering opportunities. Now flip that. The psychology of dominance tells us something else. Those who speak and act as if they're in control often are, even if they aren't yet. Power is performative. Influence begins with posture, and others respond to the story you tell through your presence. Do you walk in expecting to be obeyed or understood? Do you speak like someone who needs approval or someone who already decided? There's also a quieter trap, the spotlight of self. Victims often believe their suffering is on display, that people notice every injustice done to them. But here's the brutal truth. Most people are too busy surviving to care. Your pain feels central to you, but peripheral to others. That doesn't mean it's not real. It means you can't expect the world to stop for it. That's where reframing comes in. Pain is inevitable. Life will hit hard, but victimhood is optional. And choosing not to live inside your wounds is where leadership begins. The moment you stop waiting to be seen and start deciding who you are, you begin to rewire your reality. Power doesn't arrive from outside. It's unlocked inside, one thought at a time. Modern culture doesn't teach power. It teaches visibility. In a world obsessed with being seen, pain has become a performance. The more dramatically you suffer, the more attention you receive. Reality TV is built on breakdowns and betrayal. Social media algorithms reward confession over competence. And politics? It's become a theater where tears win more votes than truth. Whoever cries the loudest gets the microphone. Whoever tells the most painful story earns the headline. But here's the problem. We've confused sympathy with status. We started to believe that being heard is the same as being powerful, that going viral is the same as gaining influence. It's not. Visibility can get you attention, but attention is fleeting. It fades. Power, on the other hand, is built quietly, strategically, relentlessly. We now live in a time where victimhood is mistaken for credibility, where suffering is monetized, where the most broken version of yourself is often the most rewarded. But remember this, the lion doesn't tweet his wounds. He just hunts. Real power doesn't explain. It doesn't overshare. It doesn't collapse for applause. The lion doesn't have to prove he's king. He just moves like one. The Stoics knew this long before the internet existed. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while battling internal pain. He wrote not for praise, but for discipline. He believed in enduring quietly, in being strong not because of applause, but in spite of it. He never branded his struggles. He mastered them. Machiavelli offered similar wisdom, but colder, more cunning. He warned rulers to appear virtuous when necessary, but never to be ruled by virtue itself. Be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves, he wrote. In other words, use the illusion of weakness only if it serves your strength. Don't confuse image with impact. So while the world rushes to be seen, be different. Don't perform your pain. Practice your power. Don't speak to be pitied. Move to be obeyed. The path to leadership isn't built on sympathy. It's built on silence, strength, and strategy. So how do you reclaim power in a world that rewards victimhood? How do you rise without becoming a performer of pain? The answer is not in louder speeches or bigger emotions. It's in precision. It's in knowing when to speak, when to act, and most importantly, when to stay silent. Here's how to apply this mindset in the real world. The first rule of power at work: stop complaining in public. The more you vocalize your frustration, the more you signal helplessness. People don't follow those who vent. They follow those who solve. Instead of blaming management, observe them. Instead of whining about structure, learn how it works. Adapt. Influence, not through noise, but through targeted moves. Your job is not to be seen struggling. Your job is to identify leverage points, the decision makers, the cracks in the system, the silent allies, the unclaimed responsibilities that lead to control. Influence doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being useful and unpredictable. Real leadership isn't loud. It's undeniable. And part of that power comes from restraint. Never explain your scars. Let your results speak. You don't need to share your pain to earn trust. You don't need to cry to prove you care. The best leaders project calm under pressure, not because they lack emotion, but because they master it. Don't make emotional vulnerability your brand. That's a trap. When your power depends on your pain, you stay stuck in it. Instead, build a brand on clarity, on consistency, on control. Use silence to create space. Use mystery to invite curiosity. Use presence to demand attention without saying a word. Negotiation is not the place for honesty. It's the place for strategy. Never reveal where you're weak unless it's bait. Vulnerability in negotiation is like blood in the water. Show it, and the sharks will circle. The one who cries loses the deal. Instead of pleading for fairness, position your offer as valuable. Not because you need the outcome, but because they do. Frame the conversation with power. If you're desperate, wait. Silence is more persuasive than begging ever will be. This is where it all begins, and where most people get stuck. It's okay to journal your wounds. It's okay to reflect, to process, to feel. But once the ink dries, build a strategy. Turn reflection into recalibration. Ask, what can I learn from this pain? How can I use it? What patterns do I need to break? And what mindsets do I need to master? Upgrade your story. From victim to observer. From observer to strategist. From strategist to leader. You don't need a perfect past to command your future. You just need to stop living in it. That's how you reclaim power. Not by erasing your pain, but by rewriting what it means. In a world that teaches you to share every wound, those who keep theirs hidden move faster. The culture says, tell your story. Show your pain. Be transparent. But transparency isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just exposure. And the more you expose, the more you dilute your power. There's an irony here that most never notice. The more you talk about being powerless, the more powerless you become. Every time you repeat the story of your disadvantage, you reinforce it, not just to others, but to yourself. Identity calcifies. Action weakens. But those who act like they own the room, who walk in with quiet certainty, even if they're shaking inside, the world responds to them. Because confidence, even if it's practiced, is contagious. Perception becomes reality. And in power dynamics, perception is everything. It's not the loudest who lead, it's the most composed. Not the most emotional, but the most strategic. Not the most visible, but the most effective. So remember this. Leaders rise when victims fall silent. If you still think like a victim, you'll always serve one. You can carry your pain, or you can convert it into power. But you can't do both. The choice is yours.